what they do. Can't trust the media, they're all full of lies. What you know a little bit, all hoping you die. Live free or die. Live free or die. Live free or die. Live free or die.
Welcome to another exciting edition of Hardfire TV. My name is Cameron Weber. I'm an economist and historian and producer of Hardfire TV for about 6 years now. This is our third show on the Ukraine situation and is for the July 2022 program on Brooklyn Free Speech Media, sponsored by the BRIC Arts Media House in downtown Brooklyn. Today's topic is an interesting one: Ukraine, weapons or immigration. We're always looking for alternative proposals to ending the status quo of the military-industrial complex. Put that in simple terms. And today we'll be looking at that in cost-benefit analysis. Today on the show, we have three guests, and the longest Hardfire participant is Gary Marshall. Gary, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So you're a writer with Real Clear Markets, and a public finance researcher who's interested in cost-benefit analysis, which is why I thought you'd be interested in this show.
Very much, yeah. I'm sure I've got a few contributions to make.
And you also want to plug that you're writing for Zero Hedge too?
Well, I had something appear in Zero Hedge. They reprint, and American Thinker. Some of my articles have appeared there as well.
Excellent. Do you have a website or a blog?
Economart.ca. So ECONOMART.ca. I also have a Substack account, but it's difficult.
I was going to put this show on ThinkSpot, but I didn't want to pay for the opportunity. Okay, and then next we have Marcy Berry. Marcy, welcome back to the show. Thank you very much.
Nice to be here.
Marcy and I have been talking for about the last year and a half about problems of the city. We did a show on homelessness, and yesterday we did a show on subway safety. And Marcy is living in North Carolina and was active in a political activist in San Francisco before that, right?
Right. But I live in North Carolina now. It's a different environment.
Right, and Marcy is a prolific writer and has a blog. What's the name of the blog, Marcy?
JustVoteNo.blog.
JustVoteNo.blog. So, like the great NYU law professor whose name escapes me right now, 8 simple rules for a complex world.
Correct.
And next we have Noel Wiggins. Welcome to Hardfire for the first time, Noel.
Hi.
Great. So Noel is an entrepreneur and a designer, right?
Yes, right.
Areaware.com.
And I'm a painter as well, and
a very good tennis player.
And not a very good tennis player.
But
enjoy it tremendously.
Pretty good tennis player. Okay, so thank you everybody. Let's get started. So in our last show, our guests John Clifton and Brooklyn Vlad said that, okay, this is the setup to the Ukraine situation. Russia has achieved its objectives, which is to take control of the Donbass region. The Donbass is mostly Russian-speaking and was made part. The Soviet Union, Stalin made a new nation called the Ukraine and gave them the Donbass in order to get their buy-in to look like the Soviet Union was decentralized. So historically, it's a lot easier to build empires than to unwind them. So what we're seeing is the fighting over the unwinding of the Soviet Empire. We also discussed how it is to the benefit of certain special interests to keep the war going. And we've been talking about this for 5 months now. And we said that there's special interests that would like to keep the war going. Despite all the death and destruction, not to mention at least 4 million Ukraine refugees now in Poland. This is itself an unsustainable situation, according to my Polish friends here in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. Though I spoke to another one who said that it's kind of good for Polish-Ukraine relations because it's building friendship. Anyway, the delivery of weapons to the Ukraine government by the United States is continuing and intensifying. This is good, of course, for the military-industrial complex, though we might argue bad for everyone else. Today, we are going to discuss a unique and interesting proposal. Wouldn't it be better cost-benefit-wise if instead of providing weapons with taxpayer dollars, making us all complicit in the weapons industry, if we were to offer immigrants the rights, immigrant rights into the United States to conscripted Russian soldiers. In other words, if a Russian soldier who's conscripted from Russia fighting in the Ukraine, if they would lay down their arms, the proposal is if they would lay down their arms, that they would get immigration rights to the United States and a stipend. Most of these people probably don't want to be fighting in the Ukraine anyway. The origin of this idea is from Noel, who said it would be cheaper just to pay Russian soldiers to quit fighting and offer them immigration to the US. And Noel suggested a figure of $100,000. So I said, this is a very interesting example of cost-benefit analysis. Congress recently approved $40 billion for the Ukraine. I did some calculations based on what Noel advised. There have been around 5,000 Russians killed in the Ukraine since February 2022. And we recently appropriated 40 billion. So if you take the 40 billion of US taxpayer money divided by the 5,000 Russian dead, that means it's cost about 8 million per Russian dead. Wouldn't it be cheaper just to offer immigration and 100,000 each if they surrender? So we're looking at this situation with an eye towards a pragmatic cost-benefit analysis. Let's hear from our guests on this idea. So I'll just open the floor to discussing that idea.
Well, I'll go first.
Yes,
Yes, okay.
please do.
Yeah, Noah has a good point in the sense that if you just take the money, okay, this is the money, you divide, the thing, but that's fine. But is that all the costs that should be in there? Shouldn't you extend the cost to a lot more things? For example, the extended costs of education and college and Medicare and all these things that are not included in this very, very small cost-benefit analysis. So that's one thing that I would like to hear opinions on. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying I like to hear opinions.
The additional costs besides Medicare, Medicaid, and then education, and the cost of the welfare state.
Well, the extended costs as opposed to the very narrow cost that you just mentioned, Cameron.
Okay, thank you, Marcy. Who wants to go next? Noel, did I describe your proposal? Or?
Yeah, I of course understand that this is really more of a thought experiment than a possible policy thing. There's too many reasons why one couldn't do that, and it doesn't, it doesn't hold all the other people that could be paid $100,000 an hour. It creates all kinds of problems that would never be tenable politically. But
it's a good thought experiment.
That's a thought experiment. But in terms of several things is that they've done many analyses on the net benefit economically to immigrants to this country, and one of the biggest costs of human development is the years between 0 and 20, when you have to have nursing and care and education and all those things. And if someone comes to the United States after the age of 20, after their homeland has borne those costs, it's actually a tremendous deal to the United States. So, just putting it out there that if the United States were a company and we had an HR department, and the HR and the company was saying, sales are growing, we need more staff, having people from around the world come in that are, educated and already, in the workforce, so to speak, is a huge net benefit to the United States. So I'm a big proponent, and I'm happy to come on another show to say that
immigration
double its population in order to compete with India and China. The fact that we have 320 million instead of 600 million, I think, is our fault. We have an amazing culture, an amazing engine, a welcoming engine that people from all over the world want to be a part of. Why are we holding back? So that's.
Do you know the work of Brian Kaplan?
I've heard of.
You would like that. He does a very good cost benefit analysis of around immigration and argues for twice as many people in the United States.
And I understand that the assimilation costs are borne by often the working class, and there's all kinds of challenges where it might be better for the country as a whole, but segments of the country suffer when there's a lot of immigrants that come in. So taking all that into account, if there are, I know that there's a brain drain initiative right now with the tech workers in Russia and giving them, like, that's already a program that I think the Biden administration is doing, is giving them visas. So, so they're already sort of thinking along these lines. But to me, it just seems something so tragic, not only about the Ukrainians and the horrible damage that's happening over there, but also, people from Uzbekistan and from the far reaches of the Russian Empire who have no truck in this conflict at all.
I was a foreign service officer in Kazakhstan. And they hit me up for letters of recommendation for them to immigrate into Canada and the United States. And in fact, it was the White Russians and the Germans and the Koreans who all got shipped from
interesting.
Kazakhstan. But back to the
the idea that these soldiers just getting chewed up by the war machine in a fight that it's not like they're fighting for their homeland. At least the Ukrainians are fighting for their homeland, but for someone who comes from, the far reaches of the Russian Empire, gets shipped over by rail car to kill and be killed. Yeah. It's a ridiculous fight. And it seems like there's got to be a way. I mean, for one thing, I think I disagree with some of your panelists that I think Russia's enormously in the wrong here, and an oligarchic command structure that is basically a kleptocracy that's just stealing money. It's basically a mafia type situation. They are not subject to the pressures of the will of the people, like our often, struggling democracy, but at least there's pretty extreme political pressure when you screw up repeatedly. And the Russians aren't subject to that. So they can, in fact, send people from the far reaches of their empire to be, turned into fodder. And it seems so unbelievably unfair. And is there a way? And some of my thought, which again is a thought experiment, because I know that there's many reasons why you couldn't pay foreign adversaries to lay down their arms, but there was a successful program in the United States to buy guns off the streets, which is in a way a similar logic. People will go, well, if you offer money for guns on the streets, people will just, there'll be a whole industry of turning in guns, and they'll make guns in order to turn them in and get money. But it actually didn't work out that way, and it was a very successful way of getting lots of guns off the streets of America. So I think there is some precedent here for sort of the unlikely move of giving some sort of incentive for laying down your gun and finding a better life somewhere,
Just because it's such a remarkable and refreshing concept that people will then start thinking outside of the box. I wanted to interrupt real quick because we've got two different views on the net economic benefits of immigration between Marcy and Noel. And I wanted to say that I did a study that, it's well known that the labor force participation rate is greater for immigrants than those native born into the United States. Yeah. So they are actually a net labor force participation. And we'll get to Gary Marshall in 1 second to hear your cost benefit on this. But another reason was talk about net positive economic benefit. One of the reasons, or that Noel mentioned initially about this, is why not take the immigrants, the the young soldiers who decided to come to the United States and take them to upstate New York. We spent so much money on bogus economic development projects in upstate New York, Buffalo Billions. I don't know if you follow the New York politics, but at least people who are lively enough to want to immigrate and want to create some wealth, right? So
and I do want to kind of say that it's a huge supposition that a Russian soldier would want to come to the United States. I mean, I understand tech workers are much more transient and are used to picking up and going to better opportunities, but maybe someone from the far reaches of Russia actually wants to go back home and not go to the United States. So that is, I don't know if the average
give them money anyway.
If they would want to come anyway, no matter how much money. So that's sort of a supposition. I know that in higher reaches of society, probably yes, they'd want an H-1 visa and get over where there's more opportunity. But I don't know if that's the case of the average Russian soldier. So
the conscripted person from the far edges, just like
go home with wife and kids and just
like the military machine takes the worse off and puts them as fodder. Right. So Gary, what's your take on this idea from your cost benefit analysis as a Canadian?
Well, I could say right off, I'm glad we're not, I'm glad China's not one of the combatants, because then you'd have a far greater number of people.
Although, Gary, I was sorry to interrupt, but I was going to say that Canada's bringing in of Hong Kong immigrants was an amazing move. You just cherry picked the best and the brightest from Hong Kong and put them over in Vancouver, and it probably is like a 20% net gain for the Canadian economy.
Well, they had a program. They have a number of, the Liberals are always very involved in immigration, and they usually say that if you want the passport, you have to put up a certain kind of investment programs that they have. And yes, they did take a number of Hong Kong people, and I think that's still going on, still ongoing.
How long ago did that start? How long ago did the Canada start taking Hong Kong people? 2 years, 5 years?
They've been doing it for a while. I think ever since China.
97.
Ever since, most recently, that happened, in the run up to 97. But there was also just recently, you've had the crackdown on all sorts of dissidents, free press, and so on in Hong Kong, and that's really, the Chinese have really taken over, and especially during the COVID crisis, the
Chinese are very good at their zero tolerance COVID crisis. The director of this show is Chinese, and her nephew was telling me about how his family is struggling there, both mentally and physically, due to the lockdowns in China.
I'm sure it must be just horrid. I couldn't imagine it. We've had it here, but not to the extent they have there. And I tell you, I'm just here was just unbearable.
So cost benefit analysis and Noel's idea, 8 million per Russian killed versus 100,000 grant.
Well, I don't know. When you start offering payments to people, it's amazing how many people all of a sudden become Russian and start entering, your borders, and there's really very little, scrutiny of the money and so on. I'm not for any welfare programs. I think welfare inducements to immigration and so on, to illegal aliens, whatever you wish to call them.
Okay, sorry. It's really a thought experiment. So the assumption here is that there was a system in place that could vet, that there wasn't.
Right.
There was no corruption in the system. It was like it wasn't a welfare thing. It was a signing bonus. Like if you work for Google and they give you, a signing bonus.
If you stop killing them, Ukrainians, will give you $100,000 signing.
Maybe if you hand in a tank and stop killing, and then you get a little bit more. If you hang in your plane, but.
But
then the next step to that is shoot your officer in the back.
Oh my God.
Well, no.
You're saying in essence that it's not just, any conscript that wishes to come will give you $100,000. You're saying there will be vetting. Is that what you just
Yeah,
said?
it's a thought experiment because we understand that there's so many reasons why this couldn't happen. So I'm not
No, it's a thought
advocating.
process. My point that I was trying to get at, Cameron, I'm not in favor of this immigration as a benefit. Depends on the immigrant. Because, for example, yes, indeed, there were those two studies that people keep quoting saying that the workforce, they participate in the workforce. Yes, that is correct. The only problem is what level of the workforce. If you take, for example, a conscript and you have to say, all right, is this a scientist that, happened to be a conscript? What is this? But think about the level of education of an immigrant that happens to be a conscript in the Russian army. Have you been reading about the quality of the Russian army lately? Did you read what they use, the blunt force that kills people like crazy because they have no education to do a more precise. So here you're not really talking about the scientists way up there,
Right.
And so to say that these particular immigrants might be a benefit, I'm going to have to ask you to be a little more.
Yeah,
prove your point.
we're talking about immigration policy more,
Yeah.
which is going to be.
There would also be a bit of a question as to the vetting documents. Who are you going to rely upon to vet these people? I mean, you can't go to Russia. So.
Yeah, I mean, again, the idea is just to make the assumption that all this could, like there was an office in the Ukraine and Kiev, and they walk in with their gun, they put the gun, they show their thing. The assumption is that somehow there was a way to vet them, not that this would ever happen.
Yes. Assume that we had a system in place that
how it
would
would happen. Just the assumption is that it could happen.
Let me ask a more general question because we only have about 3 minutes left. Are you in favor of U.S. taxpayer money used to buy weapons to send to Ukraine?
No.
Difficult question. I think I am, and I think for one reason, and that is the U.S. and Britain gave the Ukraine a security assurance back in the 90s in return for disposing of their nuclear weapons.
That's true.
I think that has to be honored, and I think they are. I think after 2014 with the Russian invasion, I think they woke up and they've been supplying them, but on a very meager basis.
But we also promised that we wouldn't expand NATO.
That is correct. Yeah.
It's a very sticky issue. So I wanted to get. How about you, Noel?
I totally agree. But I'm a realpolitiker, and I think you have to fight might with might, and I think in this case, NATO is not an aggressive, has never been an aggressive force, except you could argue in Serbia, but I would argue it was not. And I was arguing that it was a humanitarian mission. They had to stop the slaughter in a European nation. I think that was the correct thing to do in Serbia, but I know that they have a different opinion about that. But, the idea that somebody is going to invade Russia, I don't think is correct.
The Serbian thing was too complicated for me to understand.
Can I interject and ask a question? Why is the United States, who is not in the same continent, being the major supplier of money, arms, everything to NATO? The people after World War II, after the end of the Cold War, after the end of the Cold War, the NATO people decide, we don't need any more armaments. We're fine. Peace is here. Well, that's not. So they don't have that much level of defense. And my question is why? Why
as Trump said,
I don't agree with almost anything Trump said, but I do agree that he
U.S. is NATO.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
As Trump said, the U.S. is NATO, and they're the one that pour all the money and equipment. And
I wanted to say,
use the money locally. So that's my point.
So back to the West and the United States as the world's policeman. I recently read a book on history book written by an American scholar about the Who, the rock band The Who, and the British invasion going back and forth. And it was written about 5 years ago. And he called it he doesn't call it the West, but he calls it the Atlantic Basin. So my question is, why does the United States need to be involved somewhere that's not the Atlantic Basin? That's my thoughts on that.
Well, that's
As a historian, I thought that was an interesting way to look at division of the world, and as someone who believes in decentralization of power. So I guess we have 1 more minute left. Any last comments?
Well, the way to deal, I think, with refugees was always to put them in an area where they're safe, very close to their borders, very close to their country, and take care of them until they can move back, assuming that they can. But that was generally the cheapest way and probably the best way. And I don't think inviting in from every troubled spot with a financial incentive is really the way to go, because it's going to be a very crowded United States.
But at least upstate New York would get developed. Okay. Anyway, that's it. That's our show today. Thank you very much.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Marshall, Marcy Berry, Noel Wiggins. Appreciate you for coming on Hardfire. Thank you for watching. Each of our monthly episodes appears several times on Brooklyn Free Speech Cable and with synchronous streaming to the BRIC Arts Media House. We have more than 75 shows on our YouTube channels. If you are interested in more classical liberal topics and ideas, we like to approach interesting and unique concepts and discuss them as a way to get over a sometimes broken status quo. Thank you, and we'll see you next time on Hardfire.